Welcome back to Circling Dialogos and my meanderings, riffing on and reading Heidegger's Basic Questions of Philosophy. I am speaking to you right now from Toronto, where I've just coming off of the last 3 days filming with, we filmed, I think, 6 conversations in the After Socrates series, the final conversations in John Vervaeke's series, which was an absolutely extraordinary experience. I mean, I'm looking forward to watching them and see how they occur from the outside, but from the inside, they were just, well, I hope, exemplary of what we were talking about. It definitely felt that way, and this way that philosophy, Philia Sophia, and specifically dialectic into dialogos, continually draws the conversation and the inquiry to the very edges of intelligibility and holds you there, right? Continually, just goes over it, comes back, goes over it, is this kind of, in some sense, attuning into what is most constituting, right? The most true in some sense. And there's a quality of that coming into conformity with the logos, being gathered, finding oneself gathered by the through line of the conversation, and in some sense, called to it, called by it. And it really is my experience where no matter what we're discussing, be it a virtue or an idea or a piece of text or something like that, like that at some point there really is this experience of that idea or the virtue or this truth starts to definitely become a thou in the deepest sense of the word. And the significance of I, thou, of the I, does this shift where it shifts from, right, how is this virtue significant to me, to an enactment, participatory knowing of finding myself significant to it. In what way am I significant to it? And that shift is really such a rich, love-filled transcendence in some case, like a finite transcendence, in many ways I would even say bordering on transformational of the experience of I, because as we shift from right an I-it relationship to an I-thou relationship, as Buber would say that the I-it and I-thou are always spoken as one word. In other words, the relation, right, is primordial, the I and the thou, right, spring out of the relation. And it's the relation that constitutes it. And I just really was struck by that experience, and continually am struck by those experiences. But as I shift from an I-it relationship to an I-thou relationship, right, you could feel a different I arise, right, as that shift in significance occurs, right, there definitely is a different I, right, in relationship to thou versus the I in relationship to it. So rich, so grateful and welcoming of the true privilege to be able to participate in this. Okay, so Heidegger. In the last reading, I think something's important and significant is happening in that last reading, because we had been looking at the traditional notion of truth. Is what is it that's most determining in truth, or how is truth determined as truth? And as Heidegger was, continually emphasizes that in order to really ask the question of truth, right, we must in some sense do so by a true confrontation with tradition, the tradition of philosophy for the last 2,000 years. And in confronting that history, in some sense, question it into its ground, such that ground can become questionable, and that's a very difficult thing to do, right? Because again, remember, we're not like we're not in time, we're not like in our history, we're of it. So and when we start to look at truth is something that's always at play. Truth, error, right? It's always at play. And therefore, our understanding of truth is continually informing the way we are at every single moment in the world. And so to turn and really look at the question of truth from in a historical sense is really kind of like trying to see our own eyeball. And because usually by the time we say the word truth, we're already standing on a whole host of understandings, right, that we have inherited. And so that turning towards history in such a way and giving the devil its due, in this sense, is a very powerful, well, history is obviously, well, maybe not so obviously, incredibly powerful. And it is been preserving the ground of truth, but also concealing it, right? So to unconceal the ground of our notion of truth, right, is to, in some sense, unravel history in a certain sense. And so Hezzy's been talking about it, the way that historically we've seen truth has been understood in terms of correctness, of basically idea and object and the correlation of those two things, which makes it a logical problem when we address truth. And so what Heidegger is saying is that the question of truth actually has never been really asked. Rather, what ends up happening is it becomes a logical problem. Now, in this last reading, the turn that just happened here that was, I think, was quite evocative, right? Was, he basically says it's self-evident, right? That when the idea and the object in the world correlate and come to conformity with one another, that is correctness, and that traditionally is what we take as self-evident in some sense with truth. But what has gone unquestioned, right, concealed in its obviousness, is that in order to be correct, in order for that correlation to be possible, to be made, the world, the object, in some sense, must be open, right, to be represented by the mind. And the mind, in turn, must be open to the object, right, to be able to represent it. And the domain between them, right, must be a domain which is open, right, for that correlation to happen. And he's calling that, I forget what the other, there's the other, oh yeah, and then the other part was, and there must be an openness to other humans, right, to be able to speak these representations, right, and co-represent the object in the world. There's an openness that we have towards each other. And that openness, right, presupposes and is the condition of the possibility for something like correctness to be able to happen. But this openness has been covered over and has been concealed until now. So we just started to approach that. What is this openness? Okay. So let's start reading. Okay. The space of the fourfold unitary openness. The first directive towards what is worthy of questioning in the traditional determination of truth as correctness. We must now seek in a first directive toward what is worthy of questioning here, in order to secure our questioning in general, and even if only preliminarily, assure ourselves of its legitimacy. Let us reflect. If our representations and assertions, e.g. the statement, quote, the stone is hard, unquote, are supposed to conform to the object, then this being, the stone itself, must be accessible in advance in order to present itself as a standard and measure for the conformity with it. In short, the being, in this case, the thing, must be out in the open. Even more, not only must the stone itself, in order to remain with the example, be out in the open, but so must also the domain which the conformity with the thing has to traverse in order to read off from it in the mode of representing that characterizes the being in its being, thus and so. Moreover, the human who is representing and who in his representing conforms to the thing must also be open. He must be open for what encounters him, so that it might encounter him. Finally, the person must also be open to his fellows, so that, co-representing what is communicated to him in their assertions, he can, together with others, and out of being with them, conform to the same thing, and be in agreement with them about the correctness of the representing. So in other words, this openness presupposes, right, and is already, in other words, must already be the case about the object, about the person, about the space between, and between the openness between the two other people to be able to communicate about that. All of this fourfold unity must be open. All right. Yet this openness has not been questioned, I think is what he's pointing to here. He goes on, in the correctness of the representational assertion, there holds sway consequently a fourfold openness. 1, of the thing, 2, the region between thing and man, of man himself with regards to the thing, and 4, of man to fellow men. This fourfold openness would not be what it is and what it has to be if each of these opennesses were separately encapsulated from the others. This fourfold openness holds sway rather as one and unitary, and in its compass every conformity to and every correctness and incorrectness of representing come into play and maintain themselves. So this openness is the through line, right, that holds sway through the whole thing. He goes on, if we attend to this multiple and yet unitary openness, then with one stroke, we find ourselves transported into another realm beyond correctness and its concomitant representational activity. This multiple unitary openness holds sway in correctness. The openness is not first produced by the correctness of the representing, but rather just the reverse. It is taken over as what was already always holding sway. Correctness of representation is only possible if it can establish itself in its openness, which supports it and vaults it over. The openness is the ground and the soil and the arena of all correctness. Thus, as long as truth is conceived as correctness, and correctness itself passes unquestioned, i.e., as something ultimate and primary, this conception of truth, no matter how long a tradition has again and again confirmed it, remains groundless. But as soon as that openness, as the possibility and the ground of correctness, comes into view, even if unclearly, truth conceived as correctness becomes questionable. So the background starts to become foreground, and we can kind of see it right here. The concept of truth and the essence of man, the basic question of truth. Okay, A, the determination of the essence of truth as connected to the determination of the essence of man. We might marvel that up till now, the ground of correctness has never been seriously put into question. But this omission proves to be less peculiar if we consider that the relation of man to beings, understood from time immemorial as immediately representing and perceiving seems to be the most ordinary aspect of human experience, and therefore the most obvious. The domination of this relation of man to beings soon became so insistent that even the very essence of man was determined in reference to it. For what is the meaning of the ancient and still currently valid definition of the essence of man? Animal rationale. This determination is translated, i.e., interpreted, as follows. Man is the rational living being. Man is an animal, but one is endowed with reason. What does reason, ratio, mean? If we think metaphysically, as is necessary here, and not psychologically, then reason means the immediate perception of beings. The familiar definition of man now has altogether different ring. Man, the being that perceives beings. Here we touch upon an important, though still unclear, connection. The familiarity of the connection of truth as correctness is as old as the familiarity of that definition of the essence of man. And consequently, the determination of the essence of truth depends on what happens to be the determination of the essence of man. Or should we not maintain the reverse, that the conception of the essence of man depends upon the way truth is understood at any particular time?